James. First Lieutenant Carl Rayon James was born July 29, 1917, son of Mr. and Mrs. Oris James of Blandonsville. Carl graduated from Blandonsville High School in 1936 and was an accountant in a Macomb accounting firm when war was declared. He enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Forces in March of 1942 at the age of 24. Carl's training was spent at Santa Ana, California, and Tucson, Arizona, graduating as a second lieutenant at La Junta, Colorado. He was sent to the Hawaiian Islands and then to duty in the South Pacific. Lieutenant James was a combat pilot of B-17 and B-25 airplanes assigned to the 7th Air Force, 41st Bombardment Group, 820th Bombardment Squadron. Lieutenant James was killed in action on June 29, 1944, on a mission over Nauru, a tiny island in Micronesia, northeast of Australia. He was 26 years old. Lieutenant James was survived by his wife, Mary of Macomb, a baby boy, John, 3 months old, whom he never saw. He was also survived by his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Oris James of Blandonsville, 2 brothers, Lyle and Harold, and sister Elgin. One of the last things Carl did before he shipped out was to accompany his wife, Mary, his then pregnant wife, Mary, to her doctor for a checkup. Carl was a very good friend of Mary's doctor, Dr. Dively, along with his late wife as well, who had recently passed away. After the appointment, and out of earshot of his wife, Carl told the doctor, "If anything happens to me, please take care of my wife." She would later give birth to a son, John Carl, and would send photos of him to Carl. 16 months after Carl James was killed in action, the doctor, Dr. Dively, married Carl's widow, Mary. They had 2 daughters of their own and were married for 60 years. Although young John James became John Dively, Dr. John Dively, as some of you may know, he knew and visited his James family in Blandonsville. On that fateful day, June 29, 1944, First Lieutenant Carl R. James was the pilot of a B-25G Mitchell bomber. It was named the Coral Princess, with a crew of 5. His pilot was First Lieutenant Alexander Cheropovich. Navigator was First Lieutenant John A. Keeling. Radio was Technical Sergeant Frank Kapla. Engineer was Staff Sergeant Harry Stockton. Gunner was Staff Sergeant Benedict T. Jasper. This B-25 flew at least 26 combat missions. That day, the crew had taken off from the sweltering heat of the Gilbert Islands from Macon Airfield at 8:15 a.m. for a bombing mission led by Lieutenant Colonel Hansen. The weather was 0.1 to 0.2 cumulus clouds with tops at 8,000 feet. Lieutenant James' bomber was flying in the number 2 position in his formation. Their targets were twin 128 millimeter anti-aircraft guns and other hardened Imperial Japanese targets at the high point of Phosphate Pinnacles on the island of Nauru. It was 497 miles to the southwest of his air base. At the start of the bomb run, the formation was targeted by the 128 millimeter anti-aircraft guns and placed on those pinnacles, opening fire with their heavy barrage. Just before the bombs away signal was given, as the Coral Princess was approaching its target in the number 2 formation of its 4-plane formation, 500-pound bombs about to drop, she took a direct hit in the bomb bay with a round from one of the 128 millimeter guns. This caused the bomber to leave formation before exploding into 2 pieces, the half spiraling to the ground. No parachutes were observed, and it was deemed the crew were killed in the explosion or died on impact. The wreckage was observed to crash into Nauru Island with several secondary explosions observed. When this bomber failed to return, the crew were first officially listed as missing in action. It was deemed the entire crew was killed in the crash, and officially they were declared dead at the end of the mission. It was the only United States combat aircraft downed by the Japanese on the island of Nauru. Carl's son, John, who was only 3 months old at the time, made it his goal in later years to find out all he could about this event. About 20 years ago, he found his bomber group and they invited him to their reunion. The group was flying behind Carl's plane when it went down. At the time, they thought it went down in the Pacific. However, an Australian photojournalist found the plane 50 years later. The bomber group gave John a large book of all the details of that day, and the book also contained 2 metal pieces of the plane which had been found. Post-war, the remains of the crew were transported to Hawaii and the United States for permanent burial. Lieutenant James and Technical Sergeant Kapla were buried at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific, Honolulu, Hawaii. While John was in Hawaii, he visited his biological father's grave located in the Punch Bowl. This is a cemetery for those who gave their lives in the Pacific during World War II. First Lieutenant Keeling, Staff Sergeant Stockton, and Staff Sergeant Jasper were buried at Fort Snelling National Cemetery in Minneapolis, Minnesota. First Lieutenant Sharapovich is buried in Erie, Pennsylvania. A memorial marker for Lieutenant James is located in the Glade City Cemetery. A portion of the nose art of the corpsman wearing a hula skirt is on the Nauru Museum. For Lieutenant James' gallant service, his awards were the Distinguished Flying Cross, Air Medal and Oak Leaf Cluster, the Southwest Pacific Ribbon, Combat Stars, and the Distinguished Service Cross. There have been numerous commemorations of the downing of the Coral Princess. Ambassador Joseph Sella, American diplomat and United States Ambassador to Fiji, Nauru, and nearby islands from 2019 to 2021 led a year-long commemoration of 75 years of peace in the Pacific, marking the end of World War II with ambassadorial colleagues. Along with 2 embassy colleagues, they hiked to the crash site to pay their respects and recorded a brief Facebook message while there. They found a wide debris field amidst the eerie phosphate pinnacles, jungle-like canopy, and a modest memorial shrouded in the plastic cover and clipped to a tree that included a brief write-up of the ill-fated mission and photos of the aircraft and crew. Ambassador Sella did more research and made contact with relatives of some crew members, including the son and grandson of First Lieutenant Carl James. On the 76th anniversary of the downing of the Coral Princess in 2020, Ambassador Sella gathered relatives of Staff Sergeant Jasper with then President of Nauru and local media in the Upper Peninsula on a Zoom call, commemorating the downing and hearing touching accounts of Jasper's upbringing. It brought closure to some of the family, and upon conclusion of this service, he connected with Lieutenant James's grandson, who posted, "Carl James, the pilot, was my father." Carl's son, John, a baby at the time of the crash, is still living in Illinois. The United States ambassador to Nauru contacted John and his son and had a video conference with the said president. John said he was very gracious, and now John feels like he has all of the story. Ambassador Sella concluded, "As we celebrate the many ways God has shed his grace on the United States, let us remember and pray for Lieutenant James, Sergeant Jasper, their fellow airmen of the Coral Princess, and all of the brave men and women who fought so bravely to secure peace throughout the Pacific and freedom for the world, as well as their family members and loved ones they left behind." Thank you.